Yeah, no. You definitely saw the connection there, and that's I think that's the reason why we are studying this. And so someone might ask, like, "Yo, why are we paying so much attention to narratives? What do they have to do with economics?" And we're going to get to that in just 1 second. But yeah, I want to respect what our brother did is invite the floor. If you have a reaction towards that, what you've been seeing, and then, or you might have yourself have had experiences where you were slandered, right? And painted in a picture at your job, or painted into a way that you somehow fit the stereotype. Now, we read this book a while back, The Memo, by our sister Mindy Hart, and she draws us into seeing the experience of Black women in the workplace, and how people press you into narratives so that they can then try to take advantage of you, or to get emotional reaction out of you. And so we have to be on guard for that. But if no one has a comment, then I'm gonna move us, because I want us to see the connection as to why false narratives. It's important that we recognize them, see them, and then come up with a strategy to deal with them. Reason being, many of you may be aware, or have heard us talk about the housing crisis of 2009. And if you remember, during that period of time, much of what was being displayed and portrayed in the media had to do with us as Black and brown people who were buying homes primarily in Atlanta, in Milwaukee, in all neighborhoods that we are connected to. That the reason why we went through a housing crisis was because of the foreclosures rates, as it relates to us not being able to afford homes. Now, we could look at that and play into that narrative, and then psychologically say, you know what? Yeah, our people are really responsible for that. Or we could look at it and say, you know what? We have to defend ourselves, and say, you know what? No, it wasn't our responsibility, but we don't know where this comes from. It plays alongside these age-old narratives. Or what we can do is another thing, is take a new approach, a steadfast approach to speaking truths, finding truths, and then making sure that we elevate those truths or illuminate those truths. So I'm going to share this with you, because a lot of people that I still talk to, when I talk about the crisis, still talk about, oh yeah, there was people who went into foreclosure, and they the burden, um, wear the burden for the mishaps of the housing crisis. The problem with that is that when we wear a burden, one that we did not cause, psychologically, that does affect how we look at ourselves, but also it affects how we look at housing, right? And a part of this community, a huge part of this community, has a lot to do with real estate investing. And so if you had a negative view about your housing experience, or how you've been painted, then what makes you want to then go out and invest in housing? And as we know, housing becomes one of the staples in wealth generation in our community. And so if we're talking about building generational wealth, it doesn't happen without a piece that belongs to real estate. But I wanted to highlight that we were accused of causing the housing crisis, and because of the adjustable interest rates and the things that were going on in our bad decision making, right? Individualizing the crisis to a demographic of people. In actuality, in 2013, after research and dust settled, I'm sure the media didn't cover all this, but this is why we have platforms now to cover this. Is that we come to find out that the dramatic racial bias of subprime lending during the housing boom was the result of the crisis, meaning that there were predatory practices, tools put in place, right, that were intended to take advantage of communities, Black and Latinos, um, to put us in predicaments where we were destined to fail. And so the people who got to hide behind the crisis were the people who were giving us these tools and these loans, and making a lot of money off of us as people, as a community, and then taking advantage of the profits that came as a result, but never wearing the blame of the responsibility. So even banks, Wells Fargo, to name one of them, were years later found responsible. But you got to remember, we part as a bailout to the banks. We signed new laws that required new taxes to be built in. And so we end up being the victims of the situation and then having to pay the victimizers the way out of the situation that that occurred. And so narratives are important because it shows us that one where the lie exists, two, that there is an agenda when it comes to our community, right? It's to manipulate, but also then to to play us into a stereotype, and to three, to scapegoat us as the problem. So I want us to have a lens to understand that just because something is working for our favor, that we still need to be mindful that there might be a different agenda that we find ourselves in. You might have heard news stories of recent in the last year or so as the stock market, if you've been investing, you know that we have been in a recessionary period for some time, even though that the government wasn't calling it a recession up until recent, right? But some of the talking points that were happening was that retail investors, right? And when you hear retail investors in that context, it's talking to a community like us, right? That we were creating this level of volatility, and that we were creating these bad investments that were helping or were leading to the overvaluation of companies, when in essence, there's the impact that we have over in a market is so minuscule compared to an institution that there's no way that we could be responsible for it. But if you listen to the media create the narrative, you'll see that it will play out as the retail side of things, the quote unquote new investors into this investing movement, are responsible or hold the share of responsibility for the downturns in these economic cycles. And we know that economic cycles happen as a result of supply and demand issues going on in the world. So there's an intersectionality between media, there's an intersectionality between politics, and there's an intersectionality between, with the economy. And it's important that we understand that piece. And so I want us to think deeper when we hear narratives about us. And some of the ways we can think deeper, as I'm going to bring it back to focus on our webpage, is to kind of. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut in, but I wanted to make sure that people, and thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the community was aware of what was in the chat. This was just to support the 2 points that you made. So what I provided, that first link is he's an associate professor from Rider University in Jersey. And he did a deep study on how there was segregation and what redlining actually did to the community, to show that as you were saying, that there were very predatory practices, and it wasn't just that we were miseducated and we weren't good with money. It was because of those practices that those outcomes happened. And then the second one that I just provided comes from the Law University of Columbia. And what they talk about is how they did very deep research to actually show that what they consider empirical evidence, that retail investors actually lower crash risk. So it's counterintuitive to what the actual narrative is. And just like the conversation we were having earlier, just understanding that institutional investors, one, have a larger access to capital. They have employees that trade 24/7, and then they also have algorithmic computers that can turn the trend on somebody's investment. So again, just check those 2 links out if somebody wanted to do further study or just deeper reading. But both of those things actually go against the negative narrative that exists in media right now.